The Book of Documents, a classic of history, also known as the Shangshu, is one of the 5 classics of ancient Chinese literature. It is a collection of rhetorical prose attributed to figures of ancient China, and served as the foundation of Chinese political philosophy for over 2,000 years. The Book of Documents was the subject of one of China's oldest literary controversies, between proponents of different versions of the text. The New Text version was preserved from Qin Shi Huang's burning of books and burying of scholars by scholar Fu Sheng. The longer Old Text version was supposedly discovered in the wall of Confucius' family estate in Khufu by his descendant Kong Anguo in the late 2nd century BC, lost at the end of the Han Dynasty and rediscovered in the 4th century AD. Over time, the Old Text version of the documents became more widely accepted, until it was established as the imperially sanctioned edition during the early Tang Dynasty. This continued until the late 17th century, when the Qing Dynasty scholar Yan Ruok demonstrated that the additional Old Text chapters not contained in the New Text version were actually fabrications reconstructed in the 3rd or 4th centuries AD. The chapters are grouped into 4 sections representing different eras: the semi-mythical reign of Yu the Great, and the Qia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. The Zhou section accounts for over half the text. Some of its New Text chapters are among the earliest examples of Chinese prose, recording speeches from the early years of the Zhou dynasty in the late 11th century BC, although the other 3 sections purport to record earlier material. Most scholars believe that even the New Text chapters in these sections were composed later than those in the Zhou section, with chapters relating to the earliest periods being as recent as the 4th or 3rd centuries BC. Textual history. The history of the various versions of the documents is particularly complex, and has been the subject of a long-running literary and philosophical controversy. Early references. According to a later tradition, the Book of Documents was compiled by Confucius as a selection from a much larger group of documents, with some of the remainder being included in the years.The. However, the early history of both texts is obscure. Beginning with Confucius, writers increasingly drew on the documents to illustrate general principles, though it seems that several different versions were in use. 6 citations of unnamed Shu appear in the Analects. Although Confucius invoked the pre-dynastic emperors Yao and Shun, and figures from the Qia and Shang dynasties, he complained of the lack of documentation prior to the Zhou. Increasing numbers of citations, some with titles, appear in 4th century BC works such as the Mencius Mozi and Commentary of Zhao. These authors favored documents relating to Yao, Shun, and the Qia dynasty, chapters now believed to have been written in the Warring States period. The chapters currently believed to be the oldest were little used by Warring States authors, perhaps due to the difficulty of the archaic language or a less familiar worldview. Fewer than half the passages quoted by these authors are present in the received text. Authors such as Mencius and Zunzi, while quoting the documents, refuse to accept all of it as genuine. Their attitude contrasts with the reverence that would be shown to the text in the Han Dynasty, when its compilation was attributed to Confucius. Han Dynasty, New and Old texts. Many copies of the work were destroyed in the burning of books during the Qin Dynasty. Fu Sheng reconstructed part of the work from hidden copies in the late 3rd to early 2nd century BC, at the start of the succeeding Han Dynasty. His version was known as the New Text because it was written in the clerical script. It originally consisted of 29 chapters, but the Great Speech chapter was lost shortly afterwards and replaced by a new version. The The remaining 28 chapters were later expanded to 33 when Du Lin divided some chapters during the 1st century. Another version was said to have been recovered from a wall of the home of Confucius in 186 BC by his descendant Kong Anguo. This version was known as the Old Text because it was originally written in the pre-Qin seal script. Han Dynasty sources give contradictory accounts of the nature of this find. According to the commonly repeated account of the Book of Han, the Old Text included the chapters preserved by Fu Sheng, another version of the Great Speech chapter, and some 16 additional chapters. It was part of the Old Text classics collated by Lu Xiang and championed by his son Lu Shigin. A list of 100 chapter titles was also in circulation. Many are mentioned in the records of the Grand Historian, but without quoting the text of the other chapters. The Shu was designated one of the 5 classics when Confucian works made official by Emperor Wu of Han and Jing was added to its name. The term Shangshu was also used in the Eastern Han. The Xiping stone classics, set up outside the Imperial Academy in 175 to 183 but since destroyed, included a new text version of the documents. Most Han Dynasty scholars ignored the Old Text, and it disappeared by the end of the dynasty. Recovered Old Text. A version of the Old Text was allegedly rediscovered by the scholar Meizhe during the 4th century, and presented to the imperial court of the Eastern Jin. His version consisted of the 33 chapters of the New Text and an additional 25 chapters, with a preface and commentary purportedly written by Kong Anguo. Mai's Old Text became widely accepted. It was the basis of the Shangshu Zhangyi, which was published in 653 and made the official interpretation of the documents by imperial decree. The oldest text and copy of the text, included in the Kai Cheng stone classics, contains all of these chapters. Since the Song dynasty, starting from Wu Yu, many doubts had been expressed concerning the provenance of the allegedly rediscovered Old Text chapters of the book. In the 16th century, Me Akutai Duo published a detailed argument that these chapters, as well as the preface and commentary, were forged in the 3rd century AD using material from other historical sources such as the Zhao commentary and the records of the Grand Historian. May identified the sources from which the forger had cut and pasted text, and even suggested Hu Wang Fumi as a probable culprit. In the 17th century, Zhan Ruoqua's unpublished but widely distributed manuscript entitled Evidential Analysis of the Old Text documents convinced most scholars that the rediscovered Old Text chapters were forged in the 3rd or 4th centuries. Modern discoveries. New light has been shed on the Book of Documents by the recovery between 1993 and 2008 of caches of texts written on bamboo slips from tombs of the state of Chu in Jingmen, Hubei. These texts are believed to date from the late Warring States period around 300 BC, and thus predate the burning of the books during the Qin dynasty. The Guodian Chu slips on the Shanghai Museum corpus include quotations of previously unknown passages of the work. The Tsinghua bamboo slips includes the New Text chapter, Golden Coffer, with minor textual differences, as well as several documents in the same style that are not included in the received text. The collection also includes 2 documents that are versions of the Old Text chapters, Common Possession of Pure Virtue and Charge to You, confirming that the rediscovered versions are forgeries. Contents. In the orthodox arrangement, the work consists of 58 chapters, each with a brief preface traditionally attributed to Confucius, and also includes a preface and commentary, both purportedly by Kong Anguo. An alternative organization, first used by Wu Cheng, includes only the New Text chapters, with the chapter prefaces collected together, but omitting the Kong preface and commentary. In addition, several chapters are divided into 2 or 3 parts in the orthodox form. Nature of the chapters. With the exception of a few chapters of late date, the chapters are represented as records of formal speeches by kings or other important figures. Most of these speeches are of one of 5 types, indicated by the titles: consultations between the king and his ministers, instructions to the king from his ministers, announcements by the king to his people, declarations by a ruler on the occasion of a battle, and commands by the king to a specific vassal. Classical Chinese tradition lists 6 types of shu, beginning with Dian. According to Su Shi, it is possible to single out 8 announcements of the early Zhou directed to the Shang people. Their titles only partially correspond to the modern chapters marked as Gao. As pointed out by Chen Mengjie, announcements and commands are similar, but differ in that commands usually include granting of valuable objects, land or servants to the recipients. Guo Changbao claims that the graph Gao presently appears on 2 bronze vessels, as well as in the 6 genres of the Zhou Li. In many cases a speech is introduced with the phrase Wang Ruou, which also appears on commemorative bronze inscriptions from the Western Zhou period, but not in other received texts. Scholars interpret this as meaning that the original documents were prepared scripts of speeches, to be read out by an official on behalf of the king. Traditional organization. The chapters are grouped into 4 sections representing different eras: the semi-mythical reign of Yu the Great, and the 3 ancient dynasties of the Qia, Shang and Zhou. The first 2 sections, on Yu the Great and the Qia dynasty, contain 2 chapters each in the New Text version, and though they purport to record the earliest material in the documents from the 2nd millennium BC, most scholars believe they were written during the Warring States period. The Shang dynasty section contains 5 chapters, of which the first 2, the speech of King Tang and Pan Geng, recount the conquest of the Qia by the Shang and the leadership's migration to a new capital. The bulk of the Zhou dynasty section concerns the reign of King Cheng of Zhou and the king's uncles, the Duke of Zhou and Duke of Shao. The last 4 New Text chapters relate to the later Western Zhou and early spring and autumn periods. Dating of the New Text chapters. Not all of the New Text chapters are believed to be contemporaneous with the events they describe, which range from the legendary emperors Lao and Shun to early in the spring and autumn period. 6 of these chapters concerned figures prior to the first evidence of writing, the oracle bones dating from the reign of the late Shang king Wu Ding. Moreover, the chapters dealing with the earliest periods are the closest in language and focus to classical works of the Warring States period. The 5 announcements in the documents of Zhou feature the most archaic language, closely resembling inscriptions found on Western Zhou bronzes in both grammar and vocabulary, together with associated chapters such as Lord Shi and the testamentary charge. The announcements are considered by most scholars to record speeches of King Cheng of Zhou, as well as the Duke of Zhou and Duke of Shao, uncles of King Cheng who were key figures during his reign. They provide insight into the politics and ideology of the period, including the doctrine of the mandate of heaven, explaining how the once virtuous Qia had become corrupt and were replaced by the virtuous Shang, who went through a similar cycle ending in the replacement by the Zhou. The timber of Rotla, numerous officers, against luxurious ease, and numerous regions. Chapters believed to have been written somewhat later, in the late Western Zhou period. A minority of scholars, pointing to differences in language between the announcements and Zhou bronzes, argue that they are products of a commemorative tradition in the late Western Zhou or early spring and autumn periods. Chapters dealing with the late Shang and the transition to Zhou use less archaic language. They are believed to have been modeled on the earlier speeches by writers in the spring and autumn period. a time of renewed interest in politics and dynastic decline. The later chapters of the Zhou section are also believed to have been written around this time. The Pangang chapter seems to be intermediate in style between this group and the next. It is the longest speech in the documents and is unusual in its extensive use of analogy. The chapters dealing with the legendary emperors, the Qin dynasty and the transition to Shang are very similar in language to such classics as the Mencius. They present idealized rulers with the earlier political concerns subordinate to moral and cosmological theory, and are believed to be the products of philosophical schools of the late Warring States period. Some chapters, particularly the Tribute of Yu, may be as late as the Qin dynasty. Influence in the West. When Jesuit scholars prepared the first translations of Chinese classics into Latin, they called the Shujing the Book of Kings, in reference to the kings of Israel in the Old Testament. They saw Shang as the equivalent of the Christian God, and used passages from the Shujing in their commentaries on other works. Thomas Jefferson and his American contemporaries such as Benjamin Franklin were familiar with and admired Chinese classics, especially through the connection with the French physiocrats when they lived in France. An American scholar notes that the structure of King Wu's grand pronouncement in 1047 BC is very similar to that of the United States Declaration of Independence. She suggests that Jefferson could have read Gorbel's translation, and that it is possible, but not proven, that it was among the influences on the structure of the Declaration. Notable translations: Gorbel, Antoine, Le Tu King, un des livres sacrés des Chinois qui renferment les fondements de leur ancienne histoire, les principes de leur gouvernement and amp de leur amiral, ouvrage reculé par Confucius, Paris, N.M. Tillard, Medhurst, W.H., Ancient China, The Shu King of the Historical Classic, Shanghai, The Mission Press. Legge, James. The Chinese Classics, Volume 3, The Shu King of the Book of Historical Documents, London, Trubner, RRPT, Hong Kong, Hong Kong University Press, 1960. Part 1, Prolegomena and Chapters 1 to 26. Part 2, Chapters 27 to 58. Indexes. Legge, James. The Shu King, the religious portions of the Shi King, the Shao King. Sacred Books of the East 3. Oxford, Clarendon Press. Includes a minor revision of Legge's translation. Couvre, Seraphim. Chu King, Les Annales de la Chine. Hokkien Mission Catholic. Reprinted. Paris, Yufeng. Karlgren, Bernhard. The Book of Documents. Bulletin of the Museum of Far Eastern Antiquities. 22-1-81. Reprinted as a separate volume by Elanders in 1950. Kato, Joken, Shinkoban Shosho Shishaku, Tokyo Meiji Shon, Qyu Wanlai, Shangshu Jinjujini, Taipei, Taiwan Shangwu Yin Shiguan. Waltham Clee, Shuqing, Book of History. A modernized edition of the translation of James Legge. Chicago, Henry Regnery, Akeda, Sutoshi. Shosho, Tokyo, Shueisha.